go into cuttingthroughthematrix.com website and make good use of it, because there's lots and lots of audios for free download where I go through the system, the big system that's global, of course, that runs the world, and how it was set up, the people that set it up, the organizations that are all participating in it for over 100 years, where they plan to go, and how they've even got us to this stage where we are today. Because every facet of society, including the cultural changes per nation, had to be designed per nation to get us to the stage where we are today. And it's been very, very successful, as you know. It's taught through the schools, all the changes, and all the children prepared for the changes they'll even experience in their lifetime. It's all planned in advance, because we're living through a script, you might say, a big long agenda with 50-year plans, 100-year plans, and so on for different parts of it to be fulfilled. And right now we're going through the big phase, because the 21st century is the age of transition. It's the age of change, you might say, where all the old hopes, the elites, will come to fruition, where they have their planned society, a proper society where the people at the bottom will have no free will at all, basically. And in fact, eventually they'll even design the people they want to serve them and work for them and labor for them, etc., etc. That's where all our tax money goes to, apart from bailing out their banks. So make sure you make good use of it. You find the history of it and how the world is really run, and how these big foundations, tax-free, exempt foundations, financed thousands of non-governmental organizations across the world. Very, very powerful groups that constantly lobby governments, but they also put their own men from the CFR and Royal Institute of International Affairs into governments too. They've done it for 100 years across the whole world. Remember too, you're the audience that bring me to you, because I need you to help me take along here, because what I do is pretty expensive. It's not a business what I do. It's just an essential thing that had to be done at the time, and come out and change the whole way that people were looking at the world and the changes, to show them that it really was a world agenda, and what was happening in one country was happening across the whole planet at the same time, with all the laws that are implemented. It's all standardized. So if you want to buy the books and discs I have, and the books, as I say, go through chronology, the art of controlling the masses, with lots and lots of cons with straight faces. And of course, you've been trained to have your favorite newscasters. That's why they pay them so much money to stay on until they're falling off their chair with age. That's because you grew up with them and you believe them like father figures. They stare at you every night at 6 p.m. and they wouldn't tell you lies, would they? And of course, that's simple conology. It works awfully well, and people really take their opinions to heart and believe it and reparrot it too. Very simple techniques. And so, as I say, you should get the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And from the US to Canada, remember, you can still use personal checks or international postal money orders, or you can send in cash or use PayPal. You'll find out how to do it on the website. And also, across the world, Western Union, MoneyGram, and PayPal. And straight donations are seriously welcome as we go through inflation and devaluation of the currencies in preparation for the big global system to completely take over all finances, which is happening right now, in fact. But as I say, a long time ago, the Royal Institute for International Affairs came up with a plan. They inherited the plan from the Milner Group, Lord Milner, and Lord Alfred Milner ran a group in Oxford University that met there every so often. They recruited from that school too, and their idea was to take over the world and all of its resources and run all the finances across the world, and they set up the Bank for International Settlements. They also set up the IMF later on, and the World Bank too. And they also said that eventually they would cause the crisis to make things happen, to give them more and more power and bring them up to their proper status. It's happening today, folks. 100 years later. Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, and I've talked before many times about the whole banking system and how it was set up. Like I said, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations, that runs all the media and so on. These guys set up a system to take over basically all information in the world too, and motivate all businesses across the world to do their bidding, not the business's bidding. In fact, when you go into the big boys like Goldman Sachs, you find massive lists of big international corporations which they own. They own the top shares in them all. So the bankers run the world. And they get off with murder, literally murder, in fact, across the world as well, because they're too big to fail, as you say. In other words, we're given no alternative to this one system that's been here for a long time, a system of banks that always plunders you at least twice a century. That's its record. And lots of times in between and smaller scales, but it goes on and on and on. And they're not going to change it because, you see, the world is run by money. And those who control the money control the armies, governments, everything. Money's at the top of the pyramid. Very, very simple. And they're not going to change it or give it away, their power over money. Now it says, a former insider at the World Bank, Senior Counsel Karen Hughes, as it's Hughes or Huds, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, says the global financial system is dominated by a small group of corrupt, power-hungry figures centered around the privately owned US Federal Reserve. The network has seized control of the media to cover up its crimes too, she explained. In an interview with a New American, Hudd said that when she tried to blow the whistle on multiple problems at the World Bank, where she worked, she was fired for her efforts. Now, along with a network of fellow whistleblowers, Hudd is determined to expose and end the corruption, and she's confident of success. Well, I wouldn't be so confident that people have tried this before. Citing an explosive 2011 Swiss study published in the PLOS ONE journal on the network of global corporate control, Hutz pointed out that a small group of entities, mostly financial institutions and especially central banks, exert a massive amount of influence over the international economy from behind the scenes. What is really going on is that the world's resources are being dominated by this group. Well, that's what the Royal Institute for International Affairs said. Remember too, they formed themselves out of the Milner Group, Lord Alfred Milner, who was a banker, and the Cecil Rhodes Foundation with Lord Rothschild. And they did set out to take over the resources of the world. That's written by their own personal their historian for the CFR, wrote that. The guy who had access to their archives. So they're still at it, of course. So this woman says here, back to this article, says they're taking over the world's resources and they're dominated by this group. She added that the corrupt power grabbers have managed to dominate the media as well. Well, you see, out of this group, they created the CFR in the US, and they run the media as well as the banks. They're all members, you see. And she says they're being allowed to do it. Well, they are the bosses. That's why they allow themselves to do it. According to the peer-reviewed paper which presented the first global investigation of ownership architecture in the international economy, transnational corporations form a giant bow-tie structure. A large portion of control, meanwhile, flows to a small, tightly knit core of financial institutions. The researchers described the core as an economic super-entity that raises important issues for policymakers and researchers. Of course, the implications are enormous for citizens as well. As his Hunt is an attorney who spent 2 decades, 20 years working in the World Bank's legal department, has observed the machinations of the network up close. I realize we're now dealing with something known as state captures, which is where the institutions of government are co-opted by the group that's corrupt, she told the New American in a phone interview. The pillars of the US government, some of them are dysfunctional because of state capture. This is a big story and it's a big cover-up. At the heart of the network, HUD says, are 147 financial institutions and central banks, especially the Federal Reserve, which is created by Congress but is owned by essentially a cartel of private banks. This is a story about how the international financial system was secretly gamed, mostly by central banks. They're the ones we're talking about. The central bankers have been gaming the system. I would say that this is a power grab. Now, we've all heard about the LIBOR scandal and so on, and the US is exactly the same, and how they set interest rates amongst themselves, etc., etc., etc. It says the Fed in particular is at the very center of the network and the cover-up. HUD's continued, citing a policy and oversight body that includes top government and Fed officials. Central bankers have also been manipulating gold prices, she added, echoing widespread concerns that the New American has documented extensively. Indeed, even the inaccurate World Bank financial statements that HUD has been trying to expose are linked to the US central banks. The group we're talking about from the Zurich study, that's the Federal Reserve. It has some other pieces to it, but that's the Federal Reserve, she says. So the Federal Reserve secretly dominated the world economy using secret interlocking corporate directorates and terrorizing anybody who managed to figure it out, that they were having any kind of role and putting people in very important positions so that they could get a free pass. And it's true enough. It's all, see, understand that warfare has many ways of being carried out. And you forget that economic warfare is one of the most powerful things there is. It's probably the most powerful, because when you conduct it properly, you can flatten countries financially. The armies go away when they're not getting paid. They're completely impotent. It says a shadowy but immensely powerful bank for international settlements. That's the big one that the Royal Institute for International Affairs, CFR, set up and run. Serves as a club of these private central bankers, has continued. Now, are people going to want interest in their country's debts to continue to be paid back to that group when they find out the secret tricks that the group has been doing? Don't forget how they've enriched themselves extraordinarily and how they've taken taxpayer money for the bailout. As far as intervening in the gold prices, HUD said it was an effort by the powerful network in its central banks to hold onto its paper currency. A suspicion shared by many analysts and even senior government officials. The World Bank whistleblower also said that, contrary to official claims, she didn't believe there was any gold being held in Fort Knox. Actually, I think they took it all out in World War II, because it came out in some documentaries about some massive finds of sunken ships from the U.S., en route from the U.S. during World War II. They were sunk by German U-boats. And it's very good documentaries. You should look them up yourselves. You'll find them on the internet. But they sent down these deep diving bells and so on, these robots, and they were bringing up big, massive boxes of gold bars that the U.S. was sending during World War II via Greenland. They passed on the way. And this was all deemed for Russia. Why? It was never explained why it was going to Russia, because they were not on the gold standard. They didn't use it. So were they simply put in there for safekeeping, or was it some pals of those who ran Russia running the US too? That's more like it, I think. Anyway, back to the article. It says here, even congressmen and foreign governments have tried to find out if the precious metals were still there, but they met with little success. HUD, however, believes the scam will eventually come undone. She says, it's like crooks trying to figure out where they can go hide. It's a mafia, she said. These culprits that have grabbed all this economic power have succeeded in infiltrating both sides of the issue, so you'll find people who are supposedly trying to fight corruption who are just there to spread disinformation and as a placeholder to trip up anybody who manages to get their act together. Those thugs think if they can keep the world ignorant, they can bleed it longer. So, of course, the major corruption at the highest levels of government and business is not a new phenomenon. Georgetown University historian and Professor Carol Quigley, the mention here, who served as President Bill Clinton's mentor, for example, wrote about the scheme in his 1966 book, Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. He also wrote an awful lot more. It's worth reading on called The Anglo-American Establishment. He really goes into it there. The heavyweight academic who was allowed to review documents belonging to the top echelons of the global establishment even complained how the corrupt system would work, remarkably similar to what HUD's described. He says the powers of financial capitalism had a far-reaching aim. This is what Quigley said, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole, wrote Quigley, who agreed with the goals but not the secrecy. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. And it goes on, quite a long article actually, but I think those who want to understand some of what's happening financially have to go into this angle of it, because you won't understand what's happening until you do. You honestly won't. As this woman says, they're on both sides of the argument to cause massive confusion. And people just give up eventually and drop it. That's how disinformation works, or counterintelligence. And also, we find that they're moving ahead to take over, to plunder us all again, to bring in their new system. Each crisis they create from the banking system is to get a further grab of power over the public's purse and governments. That's why they cause crisis. They even boast in the Council on Foreign Relations, how can we use this crisis to our advantage? They say this often and often and often. Many of them, even Hillary Clinton's used it too. And it's a CFR phrase, because they create the crisis. And It says in this article here that, for instance, members of the European Parliament, the whole thing with the European Parliament, first the Royal Institute of International Affairs said they create trading blocs. And they'd merge the countries in together. They'd lose all their sovereignty eventually, and they'd put up a massive central bank. And that's what they've done with the European project. It's done. The US is still to get its, so as to get flattened even further down the road. Maybe quite shortly, who knows? And then you've got one for the Far East Pacific Rim countries too. And that's why they're flattening all these other countries in the Middle East as well, because you see, they don't have this central banking system owned by foreigners. They don't have that. So they're getting standardized. Now, the members of the European Parliament, it says, vote to protect small bank depositors. This is a con, as they say this, in fact. It says, large depositors in the EU will from 2016 be in line to suffer losses if a bank gets into serious trouble. And I'll go through this when I come back after this break. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about the bank restructuring and so on, and how the boys cause the problems, big banking boys cause the problems, and they offer you the solution without causing the problem. They couldn't get to their target, their goal, you see, so they make it happen. And it says large depositors in the EU will from 2016 be in line to suffer losses if a bank gets into serious trouble, but deposits under 100,000 euros should be fully protected, it says. Now, don't believe that for a minute. Because they'll push, and push as always do, when there's no backlash from anybody in the public or governments and so on. They'll simply push, and they'll do their haircuts, as I like to call, theft of your deposits at the same time. But also, too, I remember a few years ago that the head of the World Bank said, too, they're going to encourage the public to stop saving their cash and get it out there. And so they did by frightening us all, you see, by using Malta as an example. Not Malta, but Cyprus. Actually, Malta got hit too. But they've used them as an example to terrify everybody else, so that those folk who have over 100,000 or over are finding other ways to get their cash out there, generally through investments, and that's what the big boys want. Have the money moving, you see, so they can plunder that, use that as well. So anyway, it says that 59 banks in the EU have been restructured following the start of the financial crisis, says the European Commission. And the bail-in of any creditors should be done according to a clear hierarchy, with depositors with savings over 100,000 euros last in line, while deposits under 100,000 will be fully protected, said Green Economic and Finance spokesperson Philip Lamberts. Green Economics, what's a Green Economic and Finance spokesperson? Someone who's sick or something? That says the votes amended to the European Commission's Bank Recovery and Resolution proposal. So outline steps to ensure taxpayers won't have to fork out because financial institutions are too big to fail. Well, if they need taxpayers' money too, they'll get that as well, I guarantee you. You see, these guys are so big and powerful. Have you looked at all the donations these boys hand out when a guy's running for the presidency or a prime ministership? Have a look and see. It's published. And also this article here, it says the European Central Bank, this big massive central bank, they set up this private bank again, right on line with the Bank for International Settlements and the Royal Institute for International Affairs, CFR. ECB's Draghi says imperative to set up a new bank body. See, caused a crisis last time, and he's doing a new bank body now. The European Central Bank President Mario Draghi said it was imperative that Europe's leaders create a new agency with powers to restructure busted banks in order to help the region leave its economic and financial crisis behind it once and for all. How can you do that when they keep stealing? In a text of a speech delivered in London Thursday, Draghi said the new agency would keep troubled banks from burdening governments throughout billing costs, by stealing it from the depositors, of course, thereby cutting the vicious link that has helped drive Europe's 3-year crisis over too much debt. The agency, you know what they've cost to in the last few years? They've cost a debt because every member of the EU has to hand millions, whenever they're demanded 11 million, 12 million from Britain or wherever, they've got to give it within 10 days by law because they signed a treaty. So they can help bail out Greece or Italy or some other country. They borrow the money to give out. See the circle? The agency, dubbed the Single Resolution Mechanism, would be able to force banks, creditors and shareholders to take losses first when a bank goes under, instead of getting the money from the taxpayers. European leaders have made a start on strengthening their banking system by agreeing to put the European Central Bank in charge of supervising banks. That's what it was set up to do. So the agenda written 100 years ago is all happening and coming to fruition as we live. But they have not yet agreed on how to proceed with the resolution mechanism. Of course they have. Together with a Europe-wide deposit guarantee scheme, these three measures would form the European Union's banking union, a key part of the 27 countries bloc strategy to combat financial crisis. Putting the European Central Bank in charge of banking supervision was a first step that will pave the way towards severing the link between banks and their respective sovereigns. But to sever this link completely, it's also imperative to create a single resolution mechanism. So what a power to have, over all the country's finances. What a power. What a power. And then it goes on, this next one too. And it's the same sort of thing. The role of the European Banking Authority must be beefed up beyond current plans to ensure the regulation of Europe's banks does not fragment into two competing systems, one of the architects of the reforms told the public hearing Friday. In other words, they want one system and not two. In other words, they want all the power in this European Central Bank. Jacques de Larosière, former head of the Bank of France and the IMF, which is a big part of the same group under the World Bank and the BIS, said the European Central Bank's role in the European Banking Union was to supervise Eurozone lenders, and it risked creating a duopoly that would split the bloc's single market next year. The European Central Bank and the European Banking Authority, which will continue to supervise banks in non-banking union countries, would be a de facto duopoly, the too big to cooperate symptom, he told the hearing in Brussels. So they want to do away with the second one, the European Banking Authority, and take all the power into themselves, basically. Quite something, how they get what they want, isn't it? Cause a crisis, offer the solution. And then Europe needs a more European UK, says the European Central Bank President. This is Draghi again. Now Draghi, remember too, was one of the top Goldman Sachs boys who worked on getting Greece into the Union, the one that failed, because they fudged all their books for them. Quite something how his crooks just get off with it. But then again, who's going to touch them? Nobody. Back with more after this.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about Mario Draghi prattling on about that Britain has to become more European, meaning that integrate more and more and more with their cash system. That's what he's on about. And he said here that with such deep interconnections, the UK and the Euro area share a common interest. The stability and the functioning of the economic system and the financial markets, he says. And he said here that more than twice as many euros are traded in the UK's foreign exchange market than in all the countries of the Euro area combined, and more than in the US. He added that the UK accounted for 40% of non-Eurozone deposits in Eurozone banks, and the single currency area was the UK's largest export market, accounting for £200 billion of exports last year. The Italian central banker said he saw encouraging signs of tangible improvements in the UK, and said Ireland, Spain and Portugal had made impressive improvements, and so on and so on. However, he called on Europe's leaders to focus on securing economic stability and prosperity for the people of Europe by forging ahead with deeper integration. Remember, the whole points of the EU is complete integration and loss of all sovereignty. That was said many years ago when they floated the idea of even the common market, as they wanted to call it then. Oh, it's just a trading group, a little board of guys would decide on trade and help out and stuff like that. Here they are, and they're going after total integration and complete ending of sovereignty. And with financial integration, that's it. Because that controls everything else is underneath the financial side, you see. So after a deep financial and economic crisis, we see the start of the European process building on the agreement at the June 2012 summit. It's all done by treaties. The process ultimately entails some transfer of national sovereignty in the areas of budget and structural policies. Now, the IMF wants to do all the bookkeeping of all the countries in Europe, so they'll be taking it all out with their hands. This is what it's about too. Total takeover. Complete monopoly, you see, by a small group of people who have been at this generation after generation, by the way, and the same families. He says the speech on Thursday night came almost a year after he vowed to do whatever it takes to save the euro. Thursday night he said the answer to the crisis has not been less Europe, but more Europe. That's the end of it, if that goes ahead, which it will, of course. Because you see, as I say, all these top bankers and that, when they give cash out for any candidate to run as Prime Minister or President, then there's conditions attached to it, folks. It's not a gift. It's a payoff. Or a buy-off, if you like. That's how it's always been. It's totally corrupt.